chickens are normally pretty hardy in the winter, especially cold hardy breeds. They can actually do worse, like when it's really hot outside, than they do in the winter time. That being said, some of y'all live on the surface of the moon, okay? I mean, you do. So we're gonna talk about how cold is too cold for chickens. Hello friends, welcome to Chickenlandia. My name is Dahlia. I'm a backyard chicken educator, also known as the president of Chickenlandia. Raising chickens has been the best way for me to find peace and joy in my life, and I want to help you find that too. You are warm and fuzzy. I just want to keep holding you because I'm cold. I'll put you down. A long time ago, I had a chicken named Higby, and Higby was a little black frizzle. I got her from the farm store that my husband and I used to have, and she was a funny chicken. Like, she was super cranky, and she was kind of mean. She's kind of a bully to the other chickens. And then as she got older, she kind of turned into this like sweet old grandma chicken. And she took care of the other chickens, and she would tell them where food was. And she got to be really old. I think she was probably, I don't know, maybe 10, around 10 when she died. Now, she had a couple things against her in the winter. She was very old, and she was also a frizzle. And frizzles just don't, they're just not as cold hardy as some of the other chickens that we have out there. So one day it got really cold, and I hate talking about this. I didn't bring her inside. I just thought, oh, she's gonna be okay, because she's been outside her whole life. But it got pretty cold that night, a little bit colder than I expected it to. And when I came out the next morning, she had passed away. Now, it may not have had anything to do with the cold. It may just be that she was 10 years old. But I still felt really bad, and I was like, I should have thought a little bit more critically about this. I think in general, at the time, I was just like, oh, well, they don't need supplemental heat. I don't need to bring her in. All these chickens can acclimate to the cold. I live in a relatively mild climate. But the one thing that we have to remember is that everyone's circumstances are different. And, when we get into this thing where it's like, everything is black and white, and if you put heat in your coop, you're crazy. And if you don't put heat in your coop, you're crazy. And it's just like, the world doesn't work that way. Everybody has a different circumstance. People have different coops that are constructed in different ways. People have different age chickens. People have different breeds of chickens. So we're going to talk about all of that and talk about, really like how cold is too cold for chickens in general. So, do chickens need supplemental heat in the winter? Usually they do not, but there are some circumstances that you will want to consider, especially if you live in a really cold climate. So the first thing I want you to think about is what kind of breeds you have. Do you have cold hardy breeds? You may have gone to the farm store or gone online and looked at all these cute fuzzy breeds, and you got the breeds, and then afterwards you were like, oh my gosh, some of these are not cold hardy breeds. That's okay. Now we just handle the situation that's in front of us. So if that's the case, if you have some kind of breed from Indonesia that is just not very cold hardy, if you've got oh, don't do that. Zorro's over here. There's gonna be some crowing. Thanks. In general, the heavier breeds that have the smaller combs, they're fluffy, maybe they have fluffy feet, they're just heavier. They are gonna do better in the cold in general. That being said, look up the breed and make sure that they're a cold hardy breed, okay? And then you can decide accordingly what you need to do if you find out that they're not. Mediterranean breeds, a lot of those are a little bit less cold hardy. Some of them are pretty cold hardy. Even the Leghorns, they're pretty cold hardy, but they are very susceptible to frostbite. Like I said, just look up each individual breed that you have to see if they are hardy for your area. Do you have birds that are very old or very young? If you have birds that are 8 weeks old, even if they're fully feathered, you can't just like throw them out into the cold. They can't go from having supplemental heat inside to just the shock of very cold temperatures, even if they're cold hardy and they have all their feathers. And sometimes people will lose, you know, their whole little flock, their new little flock, because they were told if they're fully feathered, they never need supplemental heat. But they didn't take into consideration that huge drop in temperature that is just going to be too much for a chicken that, let's say, is under 12 weeks of age. So if that's the case, you want to acclimate them gradually to the outside. And then usually by the time they're about 12 weeks old, especially if they're cold hardy, they're going to be able to withstand those lower temperatures than they would when they were, you know, just fully feathered. You know, when they're that small, you need to acclimate them slowly so that they can get used to the temperature change. Now here's another thing that a lot of people don't consider, and I have seen it. I have seen educators tell people you never need supplemental heat in your coop, and they live in Key West, okay? You know, somewhere where it just does not get that cold. And they don't understand the reality of a place where it's like -40 for weeks outside. And that can be a dangerous situation for a chicken, depending on what breeds you have and depending on the construction of your coop and some other circumstances. And so it's really important to take that into consideration, the climate that you live in, because it might be a situation where you would consider adding some supplemental heat to your coop. If you live in an area where it is getting below -15 for an extended period of time, and depending on how well your coop is insulated, depending on the breeds you have, you very well might consider adding supplemental heat to your coop. And I know that there are chickens in these really cold areas that live without supplemental heat. The thing is that they have a really well constructed coop. You know, the people that are keeping them are usually pretty savvy about what they're doing. They have cold hardy breeds, and those chickens do absolutely fine, even in like really cold temperatures. Like there are chickens living in Minnesota through the winter with no supplemental heat. It is true, it happens, okay? But when you get into that cold of a climate, if you're having repeated situations where you're getting frostbite, where you're getting respiratory issues in the flock, where chickens are getting in distress because they're just too cold, go ahead and add some safe supplemental heat to your coop. I really like the Sweeter Heater. I'm not sponsored by them. I have very old chickens, and I have chickens with chronic issues. I have special needs chickens. So even in my mild climate, there are times when it gets really cold, I'm talking well below freezing, where I will add supplemental heat to get some of my chickens through those super cold nights. The Sweeter Heaters are not cheap, okay? There's some other heaters, they're radiant heaters, but chickens need to be very close to them in order for them to get heat from it. The Sweeter Heaters are great because they are above the chickens. I have seen them on Craigslist for used and much cheaper, okay? So just keep an eye out if that's something that you want to have just in case. If you absolutely must have a heat lamp in your coop, it is an elevated fire risk. There's just no getting around it. It really is, okay? Heat lamps are cheap, but they're cheaply made. And if they get even just a lot of dust on them, they can actually ignite. And certainly if they fall, like if they're not secured very well and they fall in your coop, once they hit that dry straw or wood shavings, you know, I mean, we know what would happen at that point. So when you are securing it in your coop, this is what I always say, secure it once, then secure it again, and then secure it again, and make sure you keep the dust off of it, okay? Because there just is that elevated fire risk. Every year there's coop fires, every single year. But I understand, like, some people are just like, look, this is what I can afford. I'm just telling you, be aware of the risks and do it as safely as you can, okay? If you live somewhere where it does get below freezing, then you're gonna be dealing with frozen waters Ugh, they're like the bane of my existence. The best thing that you can do, if you can, is to have electricity in your chicken yard. And that way you can have a heated dog bowl, or you can have a heated chicken waterer, and you don't have to worry about coming out here and you've got like this block of ice that was the waterer. There are some things that you do if you live in a little bit of a milder climate to keep the water from freezing. If you live in a super cold climate, they're probably not gonna work. But if you live in like a climate where I live, just some ideas to keep that water from freezing, even if you don't have electricity in your coop. And I am gonna put that video on the screen right now. All you have to do is click on it, and then maybe you won't have such a frustrating winter, okay, with a block of ice that was a chicken waterer. All right, and of course, it's 100% friendly backyard chickens, education and entertainment, and I know you're gonna love it. You ducks are too loud.